Hello and welcome to the channel. We're here in New Orleans.
Now we Aussies like to pronounce it New Orleans, but it's actually New Orleans.
So we've been here for quite a few days now.
And we've been trying to fit in as much as we can during that time.
So New Orleans is definitely famous for its jazz music, seafood gumbo, and the mighty Mississippi.
So if you'd like to see what adventures we got up to in Louisiana, keep watching.
Hello world, wake me up to another good morning, time to go. Oh, we are all looking for adventure. 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 We are all looking for adventure.
We left San Miguel, Mexico, and headed to New Orleans. It was 2 days of cruising and included quite a few hours in the early morning sailing up the mighty Mississippi River. Although it was sad to finish our cruise, we were definitely excited for this next half of our vacation. This wasn't just our first time in the Big Easy, it was also our first time here in the US. At least the mainland. We had done Hawaii before. We stayed at the Marriott and had an awesome view of Canal Street. And on our first night, I had to try some New Orleans seafood gumbo. It was mighty fine. And as we wandered, you couldn't miss the jazz, even on the streets. Our first planned excursion was a bayou and swamp tour. We travelled by bus to the swamp and had high hopes of seeing some alligators, raccoons and other wildlife that they had advertised. It was a large operation with multiple boats, airboats as well as slow river cruises. Sharon had chosen one of the slower boats in the hope that we would get to see a little more wildlife. We were actually super disappointed with this tour. They told us there hadn't been wildlife in a couple of months. We managed to see a couple of birds and that was about all. This was a combination of the temperature being too cool as well as the airboats scaring everything away. Time on holidays is pretty precious and unfortunately we felt like we wasted a whole day with this tour. The guide was like Bubba from Forrest Gump. He just wanted to tell us about a whole lot of shrimp recipes. As they say, there's no point crying over spilt milk. We had better things to do and more adventures to come. We were staying in the French Quarter, and it's a beautiful, very picturesque place. Every street is lined with French architecture, but it's also quite eclectic, with Spanish design dotted here and there as well, all due to the Creole heritage of the area. There's a multitude of interesting stores and interesting people. It was a great opportunity for us to try some of the local cuisine. It's really one of the best ways to experience the culture of an area. On our first morning, I was very keen to try some crawfish, so I had those in an omelette as we listened to some jazz music. The Central Grocery Store in Delhi is probably the most famous for its muffaletta sandwich. This beast of a sandwich is full of a variety of meats, including ham, salami, and mortadella. This is paired with both Swiss cheese and provolone cheese and an absolutely amazing olive salad. Half of one of these sandwiches was more than enough for Sharon and I to share. Another must-try are the beignets when you're in New Orleans. You can get them everywhere, but the most popular place is Café du Monde. Luckily we got straight in, as often there's a line all the way down the street. These deep-fried treats are covered in icing sugar and are absolutely delicious, but be prepared to get messy. And every time we walked past, there was always a busker entertaining the crowd. One of the other interesting stores you see around the French Quarter are voodoo or black magic stores. They're interesting to visit, but they don't like you to film or take photos inside. Voodoo in New Orleans dates back to slave times, especially the slaves from Haiti. Visiting these stores can be interesting, but a little bit creepy too. In one shop we visited, they seemed to have satanic music playing through the speakers. We did get to learn about the Voodoo Queen and the Voodoo King while we were there. We actually bought some drawings from a local artist of these characters, as well as some of the other famous figures from New Orleans history. Sharon bought a couple of voodoo dolls, just for some fun gifts. But I actually think she might have cursed herself, because every time she digs into her suitcase, she gets pricked by a pin. I don't know if I'd want my blood on a voodoo doll, but too late for Sharon.
Before I cursed myself with a voodoo doll, we decided to take a cruise on one of the iconic paddle steamers down the mighty Mississippi River. There are 2 paddle steamers, and we decided to go on the Creole Queen. On this trip, we had an awesome tour guide who narrated our voyage. He explained the importance of the paddle steamer on the Mississippi for transporting both freight and passengers up and down the river in the 19th century. This iconic vessel was renowned for being able to navigate shallow waters. Despite being freezing, we decided to sit outside to take in all of the sights along the mighty Mississippi.
If you're enjoying our videos, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and get notified so you find out where we're off to next.
Our guide pointed out lots of landmarks and features before we reached our destination, the Chelmsford Battlefield. Here, one of the rangers retold the story of the Battle of New Orleans. Here, Major General Andrew Jackson teamed up with the Pirate King Jean Lafayette to defeat the British. We reboarded the paddle steamer. On our return journey, our guide retold the compelling story of Hurricane Katrina. He was a true wordsmith and had us engaged for the entire journey back.
We spent another day in New Orleans exploring 2 of the historical plantations, Laura Plantation and Oak Alley. The bus ride was definitely an eye-opener for both of us, with the highway traversing miles and miles of swampland. Our first stop was Laura Plantation. This tour was fully guided and started at the general store. We were lucky enough to have a young school teacher who freelanced as a guide to talk us through the history of the plantation. We first visited the main house, which faced the Mississippi River, which was only a couple of 100 meters away. The oak trees at the front of the homestead are massive, with one of them being well over 200 years in age. The Laura Plantation is of Creole heritage. This non-Anglo culture and lifestyle flourished in Louisiana prior to it becoming part of the United States. Creole is basically a combination of West European, West African, and Native American cultures. The Laura Plantation was founded by the Dupac family, and we learnt all about their family history. The Laura Plantation was founded in around 1804, and the Dupacs leased Senegalese slaves to actually build the house. It was quite amazing to see this whole house was built without nails by these highly competent carpenters. It has withstood over 50 hurricanes and still stands strong today, some 220 years later. This sugar plantation was one of many along the Mississippi, and being over 12,000 acres, it was one of the largest. We were able to walk room to room throughout the homestead, and despite being very rich, this was a working property, and this was reflected in the size and decor of the building. Around 12 family members and up to 50 house slaves resided in this house. We learnt quite a lot about the family, including Laura, who the plantation is named after. She was born on the plantation when Abraham Lincoln was president, and she lived all the way through to JFK's presidency. The house originally had 2 extra wings, but unfortunately these had burnt down. The family would bring in millions of dollars every year, and that was due to the hard work of the over 400 slaves. The slaves being made up of both house slaves and field slaves. The property had a massive kitchen to prepare food for such a large number of people, as well as its own orchard and own vegetable crops. We were amazed at the compelling yet tragic lifestyle of the slaves. Their basic detail and expected value was well documented in a type of inventory. There was even some history that one of the Duparcs actually had children with a couple of different slaves, and despite being his own children, he left them enslaved to the family. Most of what we know about slavery probably comes from dramatisations that we've seen in movies. It was so different to see the hardship of their lives through the visit to Laura Plantation. It was hard to hear that despite slavery being abolished in 1864, the slaves were left with nowhere to go and ended up staying on the plantation and becoming indebted to the owners, and that this lasted all the way through to the 1970s when Sharon and I were both young children. A visit to Laura Plantation has to be on your list if you're visiting New Orleans.
Just up the river from Laura Plantation is the grand dame of the plantations, known as Oak Alley. Although smaller than Laura Plantation, Oak Alley is probably more famous. A number of movies have been shot here, including Primary Colours and Interview with a Vampire. The plantation became known as Oak Alley when riverboat passengers floated by marvelling at the double row of giant oak trees that led to the mansion. As part of our visit, an expert guide led us through the house. However, the taking of photos or videos is not permitted. That is, until you reach the second floor veranda. The views from up here were quite breathtaking. This mansion was much more grandiose than Laura Plantation. The family wanted to demonstrate their wealth to future business associates. After our tour, we were able to explore the grounds, including the recreation of the slave quarters. At its peak, Oak Alley was a sugar plantation, home to over 100 enslaved people. These slaves faced immense hardship, labouring tirelessly in the sugarcane fields, performing domestic duties, or utilising their skills in various trades. It was interesting to see the living conditions of the different types of slaves. Seemingly, the house slaves were better clothed and had better living conditions. However, we learnt that house slaves were often more harshly punished than the field slaves. Some slaves were given the role of sick nurse, and they were responsible for dealing with any injuries or sickness. The plantation owners paid a doctor $300 a year to be available for more serious incidents like the removal of limbs. The field slaves were able to have their own gardens and chicken coops. However, the life expectancy of a field slave was only 30 years due to the work that they were required to do. It was heartbreaking to see what these people had to endure. It was hard to believe that such inhumane practices were commonplace. We saw shackles for children and collars with spikes. Life for these slaves was clearly horrific. It was interesting to put the pieces of our travels together. After learning about the slave trade in the Caribbean, and now being able to see where they ended up, working on these sugarcane plantations. Although the grounds of Oak Alley were striking and it was a lovely place to have lunch, we found Laura Plantation to be much more informative. Visiting both of these plantations was very worthwhile.
So we're down to the final few highlights of our time in New Orleans. When staying in the French Quarter, you have to visit the French Market. Here you'll find a variety of artisans selling their wares, as well as many food outlets selling some traditional New Orleans cuisine. Mother's is a famous restaurant here in New Orleans. and we decided to go and get their signature po' boy, a Fergie. This Fergie was full of their home-baked ham, home-roasted beef, and what they call debris, shredded beef in juice. It was really quite delicious.
Hi, so we're here in the French Quarter in Jackson Square. We've just been and purchased some pralines.
Now, pralines are one of the must-try foods in New Orleans.
So we got these ones from Leah's, and we'll give a try and see what they're like.
Right. Can I get it open?
This could take a while.
Got it. All right. Delicious.
I think that's a thumbs up from Sharon.
Leah's is also the only place you can buy bacon pecan brittle. Delish. A trip to New Orleans wouldn't be complete without visiting Bourbon Street at night. This tranquil street by day turns into the party scene every night. Jazz is playing everywhere, and the famous Mardi Gras beads seem to be a feature every single night. The tradition being flash people on the balconies and they'll throw you some beads. Despite my most convincing argument, I couldn't encourage Sharon to earn some beads herself. We really loved our time here in the Big Easy. It seems to have something for everyone. Make sure you stay tuned to our channel so you can find out where we're off to next. And remember, you can escape the everyday too. We'll see you next time.